like he said, I'm Lesley Day. Obviously, a lot of you guys know me. So, Lesley Day Deason is my full name. I decided to go by Lesley Day. I was first published when I was 16. And so I kind of figured one day my last name might change, so we're going to go for the middle name instead. So that's kind of why I go by Lesley Day. So I started writing when I was 14, and I did a lot of writing in my teenage years. That's actually when I put together my first full-length manuscript, which as a 16-year-old never actually went somewhere, but you know, it's still sitting on the back shelf there. So a lot of my poetry when I was younger was, I would say, darker poetry. You know, when you're a teenager, you tend to be, I was that typical dramatic teen where everything seems like it's the end of the world, and you know, I actually have a poem about that. Like, man, like I was so damn dramatic back then. Like I knew nothing. But it's interesting because my first collection that I came out with, which is the Authenticity book here, and that's also on the shelves out here at Spine. I wanted to come out with this one first. I have 5 different collections, but this one I really wanted to come out first because it kind of gives you an idea of who I was throughout the years. So it's not just poems that I've written recently, and there's actually a few of them in there from those teenage years. You know, I may have tweaked them a little bit because obviously at 33 I've grown a lot as a writer, and but I think it's cool that there are some pieces from my very, very early days of writing in this book. And yeah, so every poem in the Authenticity book, because I've had people read it, and actually someone just read it the other day. It was a friend of a friend, and she's like, oh my gosh, is she okay? Because you read some of the poems and you know, there's I've been through some trauma, and there's some trauma in there, but so when you read it, if you decide to read it, you know, it may not seem like the woman you know right now, but every piece in that book was very much authentically who I was at that point in time. And that's kind of what the theme of this was. So it's very much just my authentic self, but it's my authentic self from the time I was a teenager until, you know, one of the most recent pieces was written this year before I published. So that's kind of the story about how I got started writing. It was just more of a, I always used it as a way to process things. So when I was going through hard times, that's when I would write. I found it harder to write through the happier times when I was younger. As I've grown as a writer, I've been able to, I guess, get better at the skill of writing through those happy times as well, and you'll kind of see that reflected in some of the poems in my book. The things that I'm passionate about in life, the things that I love, I finally gained that skill, but I did not have that in the beginning. So it was just really a type of therapy for me almost to write through all of the pain and suffering that I went through in my life. So that's kind of how I used it, and so I'm going to go into a little bit about my story, because when you read my work, my story bleeds very heavily into my poetry. And I know that some of you here know my story, but some of you don't. So I met a boy in college, and it was my senior year in high school, but I was actually taking college courses, and I was in writing courses, and I met him, and you know, the whole story of falling in love and getting married young, and I became a wife and a mother, and my writing kind of took a back seat because I had 2 little girls 16 months apart, and you don't get a whole lot of time for creativity when you're raising 2 little babies. So what kind of triggered me to start writing again, and that you'll see a lot in my writing, is my husband suffered from bipolar disorder. And when I was 25, he unfortunately he was in a mania stage, and he unfortunately had a psychotic break, and that happened on Mother's Day of 2014. And during that day, throughout the day, he was kind of becoming a different person, a person I didn't recognize. And then it was that night where it just kind of, he flipped a switch. And so I know some of you have read one of my poems that kind of describes that night, and I'll be reading it tonight as well, a little later. So, you know, this man who was an amazing husband, an amazing father, I mean, he was not abusive in any way whatsoever. I mean, he loved me and our kids more than anything, and I loved him more than anything. But unfortunately, that bipolar psychotic break, it flipped a switch, and he became a completely different person. And he ended up pulling a gun on me that night, and he held it to my head. And I really thought that that was the end, that I was going to die. And I can still remember the look in his eyes when he came back to himself. Now, at the time, I'm going through a traumatic event, so I didn't recognize it at that point in time. So he had the gun to my head, and I was on the phone with my mom, and she was calling 911, and my dad was on the way to help me, to try to get me safe. And just out of nowhere, my husband, he had a knife in his hand as well, and he dropped the knife, and he threw the pistol against the wall, and he walked in the other room, and I heard him loading a rifle. And at that point in time, I thought, why is he getting a rifle to shoot me? Why wouldn't he just do it with the pistol? And that's kind of when I was like, oh shit, I need to save myself. So I ran into my daughter's room, my youngest daughter. At the time, it was 2 days before my oldest daughter's 3rd birthday, and then I had a 19-month-old. So I ran into the baby's room, and I got her, and I locked us and barricaded the room, and it was a whole hostage situation with cops surrounding the house and trying to get us out through the window. And in that time frame, that hour that we were locked in that room, my husband took his life. And a lot of people misunderstand his suicide, which is why I kind of try to tell the story, because a lot of people got very angry with him afterwards and called him very selfish because he left a very young wife and 2 little girls alone. But I can honestly say that I've never felt a minute of anger towards him, or I know in my heart that it wasn't a selfish act, it was a sacrifice. He came back to himself, and he realized what he almost did in a moment of insanity, and he couldn't trust himself not to let that happen again. And later on, I actually found out that before he took his life, he actually was reading the wedding vows that he wrote to me. And I still have them with some splattered blood on them, but I will always keep those because so in that time frame, you know, he's digging through a box looking for our wedding vows to look at all the promises that he made and the promises that he broke, but in a time of his mental illness. So yeah, I think that story is important because it, like I said, it's very, very heavily reflects in my work that I do, both my nonfiction work that I do and my poetry. And that's what really got me started writing again, was going through that traumatic event. And I really don't think I would have made it if I wouldn't have used the tools of writing, because I wrote through all my heartbreak and all my trauma. And you can kind of see the progression in my work to where, you know, I work to get myself better. And when I first published this book, which was at the end of April, I did self-publishing. And thank you. And and at any time, if anybody has any questions or anything, feel free. You know, I'm good with this being a conversational thing. But when I first published, you know, I hit the publishing button and it was like, oh my gosh, it's finally happening. My dreams are coming true. And I was just overcome with excitement. And then that lasted for a few minutes, and then it kind of hit me that my dreams came true. I finally published my first book. But then it hit me that this book would have never been written if I wouldn't have gone through what I went through. And so then I kind of had to deal with the thought of, so my husband died, and that's what made my dreams come true. And that was a really tough thing. And then it was all of a sudden I went from this overwhelming excitement to this overwhelming, like, heart-wrenching heartbreak just having that thought. And I stayed in that moment for a while, and then the more I thought about it, I realized that I could have taken two very drastically different paths in my life. I was a 25-year-old widow with two little girls, and it would have been very easy for me to give up. But I worked really, really hard, even in those beginning months. I went to so many different types of counseling because I was like, I have to get to a place where I'm okay. Because my little girls lost their dad, and I didn't want them to have this broken shell of a person for a mother. So I worked really, really hard on myself in counseling and therapy and writing and being open. And you'll see that reflected in my work. That's how I deal with things. It's like, I'm not somebody who can keep my feelings inside. I have to express those feelings. I have to get it out there, whether or not it's just in my journal that nobody's reading, or whether or not I'm sharing that work online, or I started a blog after my husband's death, and I wrote on that for a really long time, and it helped to share it with people. And then I found out that it was also helping other people, that when they were reading that, I had a lot of people reach out to me and be like, thank you so much for being so open about your trauma and your pain and your grief, because so many people aren't, and they keep that locked up inside. And it's good to know that there's other people that feel that way and that are able to express that. So, any other questions or anything? Or do you guys want to get into some readings? Okay, so we're going to do it a little different than my usual performance sets that I do. Usually I just kind of get up there and I perform the pieces, but I want to do it a little different tonight, and so I'm going to be kind of giving you a little bit of backstory of the poems and kind of what led to me writing them. So, and I kind of decided to split them up in different categories, like subjects kind of on what they're on, but I have one that didn't really fit with any, so we're going to start with that. And this one is actually the one that talks about me looking at my old journals. And because I got to a point where I wrote this poem because I went through a stage in my life where I was unable to feel emotional pain. I had gone through so much at that point that anything that happened, even if it was a heartbreak or a breakup or anything like that, it literally did not faze me, because I'm like, dude, this is nothing. This is nothing to what I've already felt. So, but it also was, that's not a great place to be. I don't like being in a state of mind where I can't feel things. I want to feel things. I want to feel the happiness and the passion of life, and also the pain and the heartbreak, because those feelings are important to me. So this was kind of a piece that I wrote when I went through that phase to where I wasn't able to feel the emotions that I was used to feeling, because I'm a very emotional person and I feel things very, very deeply, and I always have. So I kind of wrote that to deal with that time of my life where I wasn't able to. So this one is called Nothing More Than a Prick. In my room there is a shelf, and on that shelf sits a long row of distorted storybooks, written for my eyes and my eyes alone. every line of every page dripping with the scrawled ink of a hand in motion. They're filled with the hopes and dreams that poured from my mind, pain and fear that bled from my fingertips, stained sheets of who I was and who I have become. I still remember the first thing I ever wrote. It was about my first broken heart, or at least what my 14-year-old mind perceived as heartbreak. I read all my stories a while back, and there were a lot of words masquerading as heartbreak in the pages of my early days. A lot of those pages caused me to cringe, like I cringe when hearing someone write with chalk, or the sound foam makes as it scrapes against the sides of a cardboard box, or even the thought of a nail file coming in contact with a nail. I cringed. It wasn't the writing itself that caused me to cringe, but more so the words I chose to write. I was so damn dramatic. I knew nothing of love, and I certainly knew nothing of pain. I still remember the streams of tears that flowed and the sick feeling that kicked up his feet and made a home in the pit of my stomach while I wrote those words. I remember hating that feeling. I remember wishing I could feel anything other than the heavy stones that weighed down my heart and gut. Who knew the flowing streams of tears in reality were only puddles? Who knew the stones that weighed me down were only tiny pebbles? Who knew I would one day envy feeling so strongly over something so trivial? I no longer feel as a normal person should feel. I no longer experience pain in the same way. My senses have been dulled down like the knife in my careless hands that slides across my finger but doesn't break the skin because it lost its sharpness long ago. And just like the knife that doesn't cut, I'm surprised at the lack of feeling when someone tears open my soul. I'm surprised at the lack of blood on the cutting board. I turn their weapons into useless utensils. They're incapable of causing me pain. The stones I swallow feel less than a pebble. And the rivers, they no longer flow. I can't even muster a mere puddle. My eyes have become tiny deserts that thirst for a drop of water to hydrate their barren ground. But the sun continues to blaze and the rain stays far away. I've cried vast oceans. I've been crushed and buried by mountains. I've been sliced and cut till I was a bloody mess. I've tasted hell. I've seen the devil face to face. He shattered my windows and entered my home. He's poured his flame straight down my throat, and I choked on the black smoke as the fire melted me from the inside out. No, I no longer feel pain as I should. It is now only a pinprick to my skin. Thank you. Thank you guys. So I don't know if you guys want between poems, if you have any questions about that poem or anything, I'm free to do that too. So before I move on, if anybody has any comments or questions on Nothing More Than a Prick, so we can do it that way too. Like I said, I've never done this before, so this is all new to me. So moving on, the next kind of subject matter we're going to move into is depression. I dealt with depression as a teenager, which I feel like it doesn't almost every teenager deal with depression. I feel like they do. But as I got older, I didn't really deal with it as much until obviously the death of my husband, and then I kind of went into a depressive state. And now I would say I do deal with depression, and I do take medicine for it, but it is more of a, it does not fit with what we hear a lot about depression, because I call it a functional depression. I'm not walking around sad all the time. Really, it's a lot of being tired and unmotivated and not feeling the passions for life that I would typically feel. And I feel like a lot of us can get that way sometimes. So this is actually the piece that I've had the most people approach me saying that they identify with it. So we're gonna do this one. I was gonna like do tabs, and then I was like, oh my gosh, it's gonna be a lot of tabs. That'd be really confusing. So you're just gonna have to give me a minute to find it in the book. So this poem is called Functional. My depression isn't the debilitating kind. I don't lie in bed all day or cry myself to sleep. I don't even dread getting out of bed because I don't dread anything. I don't cut off contact with the world or hide away in my reclusive cave. My depression is functional. I am consistently a functional human being every single day. And a lot of days I'm actually even quite productive. My depression is so functional that sometimes I convince myself it isn't even real. It doesn't actually exist. Not really. Depression is the only thing that makes me out to be a liar. I lie. I lie to myself and I lie to everyone around me. I lie because it's functional and it's something that's easy to mask. But if I were to be honest with you and with myself, I would tell us this. Whatever part inside of me that is the vibrance of who I am, the part that feels passion, happiness, hell, even the part that feels pain, the part of me that craves adventure, thirsts for depth, and has an unyielding lust for life, whatever part that is, it sometimes becomes the vehicle that's driving through a thick cloud of fog. And no matter how hard you squint your eyes and adjust your lights, nothing is ever clear. So you drive in what feels like slow motion until you finally break through the wall of fog that has temporarily blocked your view. My depression is the inside of my mind having Kelly green walls that have been muted to sage. I hate sage and beige and anything resembling a muted color. Those colors don't belong on my walls. You know what the colors of my walls are? Like not my figurative walls, my actual real life walls. They have fun names like cantaloupe and cotton candy pink. And I don't remember the cool name my aqua walls have, but they're aqua all the same. And then of course I have my Kelly green. The colors of my actual walls doesn't really matter though, when the figurative walls of my mind are muted sage. My depression is controlled claustrophobia. You know it's there. You recognize its presence. You feel the itch of panic tingle on your skin, but you will yourself to breathe and tell yourself you will be okay. You don't allow yourself to scratch the itch because it will only make it spread. My depression isn't an always. It's more of a sometime. But sometimes, sometime can last quite a long time. And when it does, I don't really feel like I'm living. Not real living. Not the living I want to be living. Because the part of me that matters most becomes a foggy, muted version of controlled claustrophobia. But my depression is functional. You don't see it. So therefore, it isn't real. Do just a couple more and more about the depression aspect before we move on. So this one is called Warning. And I will say that a lot of the pieces in this book I kind of consider spoken word pieces. They're good performance pieces. And I kind of got into that after I started watching a lot of videos of Button Poetry's poets. I don't know if anybody has heard of Button Poetry. They have some great poets. And so this was kind of my first piece that I kind of considered a spoken word piece. And I was like, man, that one sounds good when you read it out loud. So this one is called Warning. I can't promise you that I'll always be happy, that I'll have a smile on my face for you, or that I'll always be ready for adventure and fun. Some days I'll just want to sit and do nothing at all. I may want you by my side, or I may just want my own thoughts for company. I'm going to get pissed. I'm going to yell and I'm going to scream. There will be days when I'm irritated with the world for no particular reason, and I'll especially be irritated with you. I'm not fond of pride though, so I'll always say I'm sorry and admit when I am wrong. I'll admit to you that maybe I was just acting a little crazy. I'm going to get sad, and sometimes your smile will make it go away. But there will be times when nothing you do or say can dim the sadness inside. So I'm going to cry, and neither you nor I will exactly know why. Because although happiness holds the blinding light that dominates the darkness of the rest, they're all still living inside. And it's only fair they get their chance to let their darkness shine. So I'm going to do one more in the depression. And this poem was actually published once before in an anthology. And this one is called Painted Colors. I've painted this soul with colors and brought to light the darkness. With painful, determined precision, broken hands created designs drip with infectious desires, traveling through bursting, fragile veins. Strokes of color do not come easy, nor do they come quickly. But all it takes is one small blink to paint black over all of the colors and drench the soul in darkness. Yeah, that's a shorter one, I know. Everybody's used to my really long ones. All right, so this one doesn't really, it kind of deals with a lot of different themes, so I just kind of threw this one in there. And then after that, we're gonna move into some of my poems about books, because hey, we're an independent bookstore and it's awesome. And anybody who knows me loves books, knows that I love books. Actually, I found out the other day that technically I am considered a library. Because apparently if you own 1,000 books, you are considered a technical library. I am very close to owning 3,000, so we'll get into some of my book poems after this one. I actually have friends who treat me as a library. So I have a lot of my friends who I trust with my books, but they check out my books and then they're like, you know, bring back a stack and they're like, hey, next time I see you, can you bring me like 5 new books? And I'm like, okay, sure. Okay, so this next one is called Comfortably Alone. I wrote this one because, so there's a time frame in this one. I wrote this one 3.5 years after my husband died. And at that point, I kind of had those expectations like, Lesley, when are you gonna find somebody? You know, why don't you get on a dating site? It's time to like find somebody new. And I was not ready because at 3.5 years, I was doing really good. But I got to the point to where I was doing so well in my life that I was like, I really like being alone right now. And that's kind of what this poem is about, is being comfortable in our loneliness. And in between relationships, I feel like that's a really healthy place to be before you move on to somebody new, is getting comfortable alone before you jump into a relationship with somebody else. So this was kind of addressing those people that were giving me shit that I was still single 3.5 years later. And for the record, I stayed single for 6 years. So this one is called Comfortably Alone. There are so many people searching for love, wanting love. They're looking for love with profiles on Match.com, eHarmony, Plenty of Fish, and let's not forget Tinder. Oh wait, I forget. That's just the one they used to fuck. You know, I get it, I guess. Everyone just wants to be loved. When I was young, I wasn't quite like the other girls my age. I was comfortable with my loneliness, comfortable with my solitude. I didn't crave the attention from boys as so many teenage girls do. I never had the thought, oh my God, I want a boyfriend, I need a boyfriend. It wasn't that I was against the concept or repulsed by it. I liked boys just as much as anyone else and even dated a few. I was just more of a, if it happens, then it happens. But if not, I'm perfectly happy being me all by myself type girl. Isn't it funny how the girl who isn't looking for it is the girl who gets it first? I got mine quite young at only 18. He came to me through the bickering and bantering over the college newsroom that drove the editor nuts, and the seat next to mine in creative writing class and asking for a pen, and the writing of a poem about the girl in the blue vintage coat that he would never let me read even though I was the girl in that blue vintage coat. It was in the lessons on the proper way to eat hot wings, the breaking into a park at midnight and swinging so high it felt like we may actually touch the sky. It was in the sound of our feet hitting the pavement as we ran chasing ducks until their wings spread to take flight. It was watching Lost Boys in his college dorms. I thought to myself, why the hell would he pick this movie? Would you believe he first kissed me during that terrible movie? I wasn't searching for that love, but it hit me like a crashing wave. That love gave me happiness. That love gave me a home. That love gave me 2 daughters. But now that love is gone. His lungs no longer breathe in the oxygen of this world because they're buried in the ground. 3.5 years. That's how long it's been. And where before I couldn't breathe, and I couldn't go 10 minutes without a tear streaming down my face, and most days were spent huddled in the corner as my screams and wails filled the empty space, where all I wanted to do was go to sleep and forget about the reality that had become my life. But sleep had become a scary thing to me. I filled my bed with pillows just to take up all the extra empty space. When I would finally fall asleep, it would be filled with horrors worse than my reality. When I was awake, I would wake up shaking with ragged breasts and a face wet with tears I didn't know I had been crying. I was simply a mess. But 3.5 years, that's how long it's been. And somewhere between then and now, my breathing became stronger. The tears stopped slipping from my eyes. The empty space was filled with silence or laughter instead. Reality was no longer something I needed escaping from, and sleep had become the mundane necessity that fueled my long days. But with that came the expectations. You see, based on the most common ideologies, the most natural thing for me to do would be to go searching for love, to try to find someone to fill the void that they perceive to be in my life. Because if you lose a love, eventually you go and find yourself another. That's just the thing you do. No one seems to understand why I choose to be alone, why I choose to not fill what they believe to be a void. A relationship has never been a necessity in my life because no man completes me. I complete myself. I am comfortable in my loneliness, comfortable in my solitude. I am not looking for love. I am not searching for love. If it happens, then it happens. But if not, I'm perfectly happy being me, all by myself. Thank you. All right, so this next one is, well, I was flipping to it. This one is called Shelves Alone. Dad, you're mentioned in this, and I'm sorry. I love my dad. You'll see when it gets to it. My dad does not understand my obsession with books. He will be the first one to move a new bookshelf into my house, but I don't think he understands why I love books so much and why I want them so much. So, this one is called Shelves Alone. When I hear someone say they can't buy another book because they have to get their current books under control, those words don't make sense. I mean, I literally don't understand the words coming out of their mouth. It would be like me saying, I'm sorry, I can't be your friend because I have to get my current friends under control. That's how ridiculous you sound when you say you don't need more books. My books are friends to me, each with their own unique personality, and I can always use more friends, both hard copy and in the flesh. My friendship with books is one of the things that makes me happy to be alone. When you're alone, there's no one to say you have too many books. My dad is not a yeller. He yells while working on cars, and he yells about my mom's books. That's about it. My mom has a crush on books, whereas I have an obsession. I love my dad, but I don't want to be yelled at about my books. So sometimes I'm happy I am alone. I once loved a man who loved my books. I mean, he loved me too, but my point is he loved my books. He didn't yell about there not being enough space. He just built me more shelves. And when there was no more space on the walls, he just built shelves that wrapped around my ceiling. He would have built me a mansion of books. I miss that man, but his mind stole him away from me. I think I may just want to stay alone until I find another man who is willing to build me a wing for just one book. Thank you, guys. All right, so this next one, it's a book 1-2, and for those of you who like reading electronic books, please don't take offense. I am not an electronic book reader. I just don't like it. I tried to. My husband, at one point when I was a nursing mom, my husband, he was like, oh, I'm gonna get her such a great present, and I'm gonna buy her a Kindle because it'll be easier to read. And I swear for months I tried to read on that thing just to not make him feel guilty, but I hated it the entire time because I'm like, I want a real book in my hand. So I decided to do this one because we are in a bookstore, you guys, and we're in an awesome bookstore. So everybody should get themselves one of those books in there tonight. But yes, so I definitely, this one was written because I don't like electronic books and I want the real ones. So this is called Digitized Words. I can't bring myself to read electronic books because although they have all the same words, they're somehow lacking a certain emotion. I tried it once. I felt I was being impersonal, and my mother taught me to always be personable. I felt like I was being rude to the book and cheating it out of my undivided devotion. We had a disconnect. It felt like the serious conversation through text that your voice should have said to my face. I couldn't feel the breath or watch the expression in the words. They didn't seem as genuine. The tip of my pen ached for the touch of the page. You see, my pen is typically friends with the books I read, but they forgot to invite him to this particular party, and that's not fair. I don't like when my pen is left out because my pen is directly linked to me, and I don't like being left out. I never get to attend the party of electronic books because they never send the invite. Thank you, you guys. All right, one more that kind of goes into this, but this one's more about journaling. So let me find that real quick. So this one is called Addiction to Lines. I have an unhealthy addiction to blank journals. If box full of blank lines can be considered unhealthy. Either way, I have an addiction. I once filled the last line of a journal with ink, and when I went to grab a new one, I was excited at the thought of my blank canvas, but my hand grasped thin air, and I felt an unfamiliar panic fill my chest. The shelf was bare. There were no more lines to fill, and the words began to crowd my mind. I drove to the store and bought 6 new books of lines to fill. Enough to breathe, but not enough to draw attention. Because that's what makes me anxious. Shelves lacking young journals that haven't learned to speak. I try to avoid that feeling at all costs. So much that I now buy a new journal a few times a month. They sit in a pile on my shelf, and when I look at the different colors melding together, I feel safe. I'm no longer anxious about running out of lines. I feel confident that there will be enough for my thoughts to sleep. So once again, anxiety is a stranger I do not know. Just the one who once said hello, and that's fine by me. His hello was a question when he noticed bare shelves. My answer was the ascending pile of blank lines that told him to sit down and shut his mouth. After that, he said goodbye, and I haven't seen him since. Thank you. So I forgot to kind of tell the story behind that one, but as you guys could see, I filled up a journal and I was like, oh yay, it's time for my new one because I get so excited when I fill up a journal. And then I went and it was like no journals on my shelf. And I'm not an anxious person. I do not deal with anxiety or panic. I never have, but that's the first time like I felt like I was actually having like a panic attack. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have all these thoughts in my mind and I have nowhere to put them. So yes, that's why now I have tons of journals because I buy a couple every month. So now we're going to get into some of the poems that deal with some of the trauma I've been through. So we're going to start with, this is one of my most popular pieces for performances and videos and everything like that. And this one it deals with PTSD and the fact that one of my triggers for my PTSD is mental illness. So when there's people around me who deal with mental illness, not necessarily on a daily basis, but when they reach that point to where they're no longer acting like themselves, that is one of my triggers. And I realize that, and I try to kind of avoid those triggers now that I know that it's a trigger. But this poem was written after a particular situation where I had a trigger, and it was somebody who dealt with mental illness, and they kind of had that blank look in their eye where they weren't really there anymore. And nothing happened, and they didn't do anything, but just seeing that look triggered my PTSD. And I didn't necessarily have flashbacks, but I had flashes of that particular person hurting me. So that's what this poem was written about. And this one is called I've Been Here Before. Sitting across from you while you're dressed in matching green, listening to the sound of your voice stringing together a long line of words that doesn't make an ounce of sense. Time, date, day, time, date, day. What's your name again? I try to find you, but you don't seem to be home. I've been here before. only it wasn't you, it was him. I've already heard the nonsensical ramblings of a mind that didn't belong. I've seen the vacancy sign flicker in a pair of eyes I no longer recognize. I've been here before, and it strikes a chord inside, one that's connected to the notes of fear and dread. They're deafening as they course through the blood in my veins. 'Cause you see, I've been here before, and it wasn't exactly here, but it was there. And it wasn't exactly your eyes, your words, your voice from that incomprehensible nonsense. It was his. It's all just a little too familiar, though. When I see vacant eyes and hear the voice of nonsense, it makes me remember all too well. You weren't there, but he was, and his hand was wrapped around the stock of a pistol with his index finger resting on the trigger, all connected to the barrel that pressed against my head, and in his other hand he held the knife that glistened in my line of sight. Now I know that wasn't you, and I'm not saying that's what I think you'll do, but eyes, looks, words, tone of voice, and the rambles of a mind that is temporarily not your own triggers something inside. I see it flash before my eyes, only this time, he's not the one in my line of sight, it's you. And you may not be using the same mechanics he did, but your intent and action is the same. You want to hurt me, and you coming at me is what flashes before my eyes. Now I'm not so far gone from reality that I think that this is actually happening. I'm aware it's just an illusion caused by something along the lines of PTSD. I'm even able to realize that my thoughts may be irrational. But my body, well, she's a fool. And she thinks the illusion is reality. She trembles with the fear of staring death in the eye. And you see, I know what comes next. Because remember, I've been here before, and what comes next scares me too because you're someone that I love. I'm still here, which means he obviously didn't pull that trigger. His eyes flipped the switch from vacancy to occupied, and they saw his wife with the barrel of a pistol pressed her head, and he saw the hand that was holding the pistol was connected to the arm that was connected to the man that was himself. That's when he walked in the other room and shot himself. I've been here before, and I can't go back there again. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna look where we're at time because if you guys, I'm gonna ask you guys what you want. If you'd rather hear more from this book, or I did bring a few poems from each of my other collections that will be coming out just to give you guys an idea of the different types of poetry that I write. So does that sound good to you guys? Okay, all right, cool. So I'll do some more out of here because we still got about 40 minutes. So I'm gonna do this one. I've actually never performed this one before, so this will be a first. And this is another PTSD one, but it deals with a different type, I guess a different symptom. So most of my PTSD in the beginning was nightmares. So this one kind of deals with, and they were the kind of nightmares that they stick with you once you're awake. And it was to the point to where, you know, I'd be crying and screaming, huddled in a ball in the corner of a room because I just could not shake my nightmares. And so I wrote this one kind of dealing with those PTSD nightmares. And this one is called Presence of Horror. I feel their presence looming over me. They hang on the fringes of my mind, impatiently waiting for the drift into unconsciousness where they're able to claw their way in and tear into the false pretense of peace that has been created, something I foolishly believed would be a lasting state of mind. They crawl through the crevices, sinking their sharp teeth into everything in sight until they drip with that which was once serene. They drink the luminous light, leaving only shadows in its wake, shadows that take a shape of the horrors I never knew to dread. I try to fight their darkness, desperate to only be awake, but fighting them is like throwing a punch while drowning in the waters that fills my fragile lungs. They suck away what strength I have and leave me weak in the wake of their destruction. At their disposal am I to torture as they may. Brutality is a language they speak, and mercy is incomprehensible. Minutes are hours, hours are days, and sleep is an eternity when it's shared with the ones that suck the life from your dreams. An echo in the darkness. A faint, familiar sound, a dim light pulsing through the shadows with each soft cry of my name. Silence erupts from my voice as I scream my futile reply, my arms and legs unmoving as I strain against the shackles and blood drips down the chains. The cry of my name becomes a scream that shakes my bones and breaks chains and shackles, a scream that jolts my mind awake. I'm staring at a familiar ceiling as rapid shallow breaths travel through my lungs and sweat drips down my face. They slip from my mind and raise the hairs as they crawl across my skin, escaping the consciousness that has abruptly appeared. Shaking myself free of their presence, I breathe in and out in an attempt to calm the chills running up and down my spine. Placing my feet on the cold, hard floor, I stand up and start my day. Thank you, guys. All right, so this next one is it's called Ignorance, and this one was written with for those of you that know, when you go through grief and you're grieving, you're gonna have lots of people judge you on that grief. Are you doing it the right way? Are you recovering as fast as you should? And you have some people that, you know, they get upset because you're still upset. Your husband died. I actually had a counselor say this to me, and I'm not gonna lie, and I never saw him again. He said, your husband died 4 months ago. I feel like it's time you move on and get over it. Yeah. And I mean, as you guys can see, I went through just a lot more trauma than just my husband dying. So there are those people who think that you should just get over it. You should be able to move on very quickly. But then when you do finally move on, you have the people who are pissed off at you because you've moved on. Because you shouldn't be that happy. You know, you shouldn't be able to move on with your life. Your husband died. What the hell is wrong with you? Why are you smiling? Why are you acting like you're enjoying your life? So this poem was kind of to address those people. And so it's called Ignorant because obviously those people are very, very ignorant and they don't understand things. So, you know of my loss, and you may even know the details surrounding that loss. But don't be ignorant enough to think that you know enough to express opinions on my grief. Have you seen it? Have you been there? Have you walked the paths of my mind? Were you walking those paths when my 6-year-old told me she wanted to die because that was the only way to see her dad? Did my thoughts trample you to the ground? Did your blood mix with the dirt? Have you ever had to explain mental illness to a small child? Explain a psychotic break? How someone they know and love can become a completely different person in the blink of an eye? How it can make them do things they don't want to do? How it can make them hurt the ones they love, make them hurt themselves? Have you explained that? Have you been forced to break a heart? Have you held the shattered hearts of your children in your hands, trying to not let even the tiniest piece slip through the cracks when all the while your own is a pile of ash? Have you done that? Have you dreamt of a gun to your head night after night only to be woken by the screams of your child fighting her own monsters in her dreams? Have you felt that? Has tragedy stole the life you knew away? Did he alter your existence, change you into something different? Have you ever been criticized for healing too slowly? Have you been told you shouldn't be that sad? Have you clawed your way out of the darkness only to turn around and have your smiles criticized for being too genuine? Have you been told you shouldn't be that happy? Tragedy charged me a life, and you have the audacity to say I owe him more? I won't pay him the dollar bills I call smiles or write him a check signed happiness. Those are staying in my account. So tell me, have you seen it? Have you been there? Have you explained that? Have you done that? Have you felt that? No? Then maybe, just maybe, you should really shut your mouth. Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna do one on, this one's on insomnia. So insomnia is something that I have dealt with from the time I was like 15, and I still deal with it to this day. And I kind of have, this poem is about having a love-hate relationship with insomnia. Because I will say that when I'm dealing with insomnia, that is when I'm the most creative. I mean, that's when all my best work happens, is when I'm not sleeping. When I do sleep, like a normal person sleeps, I'm not as creative, and I'm actually more tired because my body is so used to not sleeping. But the double-edged sword of insomnia is that creativeness only lasts for so long, and my insomnia has like gone on for 2 weeks or even longer than that. And then you kind of start to move into things kind of aren't making sense, and it kind of move into a state of madness, and you're like, oh my gosh, I just want to be able to sleep, please let me sleep. So this poem kind of deals with those conflicting emotions to deal with insomnia, and it's called She Comes at Night. I have come to the realization that I have an enemy I've come to love, an enemy I miss when she leaves me, an enemy that hides her toxicity under the guise of lust. Her name, insomnia. You know how that saying goes, keep your friends close but your enemies closer? Well, that's how I finally figured it out. You see, insomnia always keeps me close, so close at times it's hard to cope. You know how when you lay your head down on a pillow at night and within minutes you've drifted off to sleep? I lay my head down on a pillow at night, and that's when I come awake. I toss, I turn, I'm hot, I'm cold, my foot bounces up, down, up, down, up, down, my legs shift back and forth, and I vaguely remember those commercials. You know, the ones about RLS, and I'm angry. I'm angry I can't find sleep as I stumble through the endless depths of restlessness. But then something changes. Insomnia is beguiling. She knows her way in because she knows what I want. She knows what turns me on. She softly caresses my mind, molding it into something she knows I desire. It becomes a train racing down the tracks into the darkness of the tunnels where my dreams live, the conscious soul-aching dreams I crave, the ones that come alive in the wake of her existence. She injects their vitality in my veins and watches in fascination as they consume my soul. Isn't it strange that it's the dreamers that rarely sleep? Insomnia plays the friend part well, for when she's in my bed at night, she inspires me and wrenches my most authentic self free. She feeds me a lack of sleep that triggers my creative switch, clever thoughts I form into lines of poetry. My best work happens when she's lying down beside me. She gives me jolts of energy and fills me with something that seems a whole lot like motivation. She wakens my mind and gives me insights to new perspectives. She's the drug I've come to crave, for I feel the most alive when she's living inside. The problem is, insomnia always overstays her welcome. And just like a drug, eventually she leaves me feeling strung out. Someone once told me a human being could only survive 3 days without sleep. I called them a liar and told them I'd lasted more than a week and never slept a wink. But in that time, I'm riding a high, aware that at some point that high will capsize. The energy starts to taper off, becoming something more like madness. Thoughts are no longer clever and they make less and less sense as the days drag on. My mind is foggy and overworked. I'm drowning as I gasp for sleep. I'm sinking, waiting for unconsciousness to save me. Eventually, unconsciousness will show his face and I'll drift off to sleep. But when I awake, I'll find myself wishing insomnia would come back to see me. Thank you, guys. All right, so we're gonna move into, I think I'm just gonna do a couple from this. These are more like my passionate poems, like the things that I'm passionate about. That's what I kind of love about this collection, is it has a little bit of everything. So it's not just all dark. It has things that I'm passionate about. It has my love for books in it, so deals with insomnia, but then it also kind of goes into that depression and trauma. So I feel like it's a well-rounded collection. So the first one I'm going to do is called Wretched Beautiful. If I can find it, give me just a second. There it is. So this one is kind of, I wrote it about myself. Obviously all these poems about myself, but this one kind of deals with that I'm a really complicated person with really complicated emotions. And so yeah, it's kind of just the two sides of the coin, that I'm both of those. So it's called Wretched Beautiful, and it says, I will never fit your limited ideal of what you expect me to be. I am complicated, to say the least. I am darkness, but I am also bright. Darkness coats my veins that are scorching with burning light. My mind is tangled, a mess of peace. I live in chaotic serenity. Sadness holds hands with joy. They coexist inside of me. I am the fearless who is afraid. I am love that lives with hate. My heart is steel that melts away. I am the vengeance that forgives. I am beauty that's soaked with scars. I am the anger that lives in peace. I am confidence stitched with insecurity. I am the everything that is nothing. I am wretched beautiful. Thank you, guys. All right, so I'm gonna read one more from this collection, and it's one of my favorites. And so for those of you that know me, you guys already know this obviously, but for those of you that don't, I have a very wanderlust soul. So I want to try everything. I want to go everywhere. And so this poem kind of deals with that. It's just my passion for, wanting to go everywhere and do everything and try everything. Just new experiences. And I'm happy to say that I follow those dreams. You know, I've been to, I think, like 16 different states, but 11 different countries. So, it's pretty awesome. So I'm very much a person that, like, when I want to do something, I'm going to make it happen. So this one is called Restless, and it's just talking about my restless soul. I love life, and I am happy. In almost every way, I am content. And yet, I am restless. There is a fire burning inside that will not be tamed, a thirst that will not be quenched, screaming thoughts that will not quiet themselves. I am restless, restless for life. Not the life I see everyone living, but the life in my imagination. I'm ready for imagination to become what is real and real to become a memory. I have this overwhelming urge to see things I've never seen, go places I've never gone, and do things I've never done. I want to see the beautiful, but also see the ugly. I want to go where life is easy, but also where life is hard and broken. I want to climb a mountain. I want to sail a boat. I want to dive in the depths of the ocean and jump from a plane as I float through the sky. I want to be a pirate. Can I please, at least for one day? I can't list everything I want to do because I want to do it all. I want adventure. I want experience. I want to be utterly exposed. I want passion, not mere satisfaction. I want to taste life in all its flavors and choke on the endlessness of everything it has to offer. I am more than what you see. Hell, I am more than what I am. I was created for more than average, so average I will not accept. I'm done with the ordinary. Throw me into the extraordinary. All right, so this is Authenticity. This is the one I've been reading out of before I go into some poems from my upcoming collections. It is for sale at Spine, and if lots of people want to buy it, I also have copies available because Spine has 3 and I have more. So
They have 2 now.
they have 2 now. Somebody bought, oh, she bought one, yay, that's my first purchase from Spine. Thank you so much.